Live happy and healthy, my brother. Live happy and healthy, my sister.
Good day and welcome to this edition of Healthier, Older and Happier. One of the biggest discoveries of the 20th century as far as medicine is concerned was the discovery of antibiotics in the early part of the century. Antibiotics are believed to be a major contributor to the improved life expectancy of human beings. Unfortunately, since the mid and later part of the 20th century up till now, we are having a major challenge on our hands. A challenge that is in such dimensions that is estimated to be about the third public health burden as far as threats to human life is concerned. And what is this challenge? It is the challenge of growing resistance of bacteria to antibiotics. When we talk about resistance to antibiotics, what we mean is that medicines that are supposed to kill bacteria or stop them from multiplying are no longer able to do so. The result is that the infections that these medicines are supposed to treat are no longer treated, or they become extremely difficult to treat. Why is this happening? There are many reasons, and I will talk about some of them. One of the reasons is overuse of antibiotics. We talk about overuse of antibiotics in situations where antibiotics are prescribed or used with or without prescription when they are not needed. For example, common cold is viral and does not require antibiotic treatment. But you and I know how often people take antibiotics for common cold. Most sore throats are also viral, but we know how often people take antibiotics for sore throats. Another reason for development of resistance is misuse, which is different from overuse. Now, I hear people say, I had diarrhea, so I just took 2 capsules of XYZ. I don't want to mention names of antibiotics here. So, and you know those antibiotics that people commonly take when they say they have diarrhea. Those 2 capsules of the antibiotic that you have taken are not sufficient to kill those bacteria. So what happens is that you expose the bacteria to levels of antibiotics which are not sufficient to kill them. And so they multiply in that medium, in that environment, and they are trained to build a wall against that medicine that should ordinarily kill them. So human beings don't become resistant to antibiotics. No, it is bacteria that become resistant to antibiotics, usually through human behaviors. Yes, over time, with increasing use of antibiotics, bacteria can naturally, as a survival strategy, develop their own methods of surviving the exposure to antibiotics. But most of antibiotic resistance is due to human behaviors. For example, what I have just described. So we expose them needlessly, they get used. We're actually educating them to fight us. That's exactly what is happening. Another human behavior that drives this extremely concerning problem of antibiotic resistance is poor hygiene, personal hygiene, as well as workplace hygiene. Bacteria are everywhere. Not all of them are harmful, but we come across both harmful and not so harmful bacteria, and we need to imbibe the practices that break the chain of transmission. And one of those practices is the practice of appropriate, effective hand washing. I will come to that. So poor personal hygiene, poor workplace hygiene are some of the drivers of antibiotic resistance. You can't believe that a drop of infected blood that has even dried up on a hospital table or on a bed sheet of a patient can remain infective for months, depending on how fastidious, how strong, quote and unquote, the organism that is in that blood is. So we need to be very mindful. You and I need to be very mindful of our person and of our space. Unfortunately, we are not so careful, and the result is we just become the vehicles for moving harmful bacteria from one location to another, and unfortunate people become the victims of these infections. Last week, I had a situation where someone close to me had to be hospitalized. What started like a mild fever became a fever that was not responding to anti-malaria therapy, and the woman was admitted into hospital. Before we knew it, her kidneys were challenged and we were dealing with acute kidney injury. By this time, she was on antibiotics already. The good news is that she responded, or she's responding to treatment, because the antibiotics were effective to treat the organisms that caused her infection. But the story is not always so. I have been in practice for decades, and I have seen painful situations in which people have died because of antimicrobial resistance. I can tell you story upon story upon story. One that I remember which still causes a lot of heartache is that of a colleague's mother who was admitted with urinary tract infection. Antibiotic therapy was started. She was not responding. Antibiotics were changed. She was still not responding. Before we knew it, she had organ failure. She had to be admitted in the ICU. ICU is intensive care unit. And unfortunately, in spite of having had access to the best of care, to the most expensive of appropriate antibiotics, she died. Painfully, she died. And there are many stories like that. The most vulnerable people are elderly people and children 5 years and below. Another human behavior that drives antibiotic resistance is poor sanitation. We are responsible to be sure that we handle waste properly. You and I are aware of how many times we dispose of refuse, for example, and we don't wash our hands. How many times we leave potentially infected material uncovered, or when we dispose, we do not dispose in a way that they are not exposed. And for every one of such behaviors, we are exposing the environment, the bacteria in the environment, to opportunities to develop resistance. And nobody knows who gets infected with resistant bacteria. Even the way we dispose of antibiotics themselves. If we leave antibiotics hanging around, what we are actually doing is exposing the environment to antibiotics. So it is one thing to leave infected waste around. It is another thing to leave even the antibiotics themselves exposed. So the environment and the innocent bacteria in that environment get exposed to levels of antibiotics that cannot kill them, enable them to multiply. And the fact that they are able to multiply in the midst of those antibiotics means that if they infect someone, then that particular antibiotic is not going to be effective. We have seen alarming situations of patients who are admitted and their cultures, their specimens are taken for microscopic culture and sensitivity. That is, you take the specimen to examine in the lab, and out of 10 antibiotics, not a single one is effective to kill that microorganism. What this means is that we now have to search within the toolbox whether there's another antibiotic that is available, or we have to find ways to contain that infection. And honestly, it increases the cost of care. It increases the likelihood of complications of prolonged hospital stay. And of course, more often than not, this leads to unnecessary loss of lives. The prescription of broad spectrum antibiotics that can take care of this, take care of that, and take care of as many things as possible is another problem that drives antibiotic resistance. And we know, if you live in the part of the world where I do, that these antibiotics don't necessarily have to be prescribed, because people can easily walk across the counter and medicines that they shouldn't be able to get, they somehow are able to get them across the counter just for the asking. The plea to every one of us is this: what goes round comes round. If you are in the habit of taking antibiotics for every time you cough and sneeze, if you are in the habit of taking antibiotics when you have one or two loose stools, if you are in the habit of sharing antibiotics with friends and family members, just be aware that you are creating a market for the thriving of bacteria that will become resistant to those antibiotics. And sometimes they can be cross-resistance. Resistance to one antibiotic, conferring on those bacteria ability to resist other antibiotics in that class. And you have no way of telling who gets infected with that resistant bug. So what do? There's a lot that needs to be done that is not within the purview of people like you and I, who are just everyday people living in the community. There's a lot that needs to be done at government levels, but a lot can be done by you and I. For example, government is not going to help you and I to dispose of our personal waste. We need to be responsible enough to learn the discipline of disposing of our personal waste and of being careful when we suspect that we or somebody close to us are infected. I found the scripture in Leviticus 15 very instructive. And to think that several thousands of years ago, God had put these principles down for infection prevention and control. Please just be patient and listen. He said, "Speak to the children of Israel and say to them, when any man has a bodily discharge, his discharge is unclean. This shall be the law concerning his uncleanness in his discharge. Whether his body allows its discharge to flow or obstructs its flow, it is uncleanness in him. Every bed on which the one who has the discharge lies becomes unclean, and everything on which he sits becomes unclean. Whoever touches his bed shall wash his clothes and bathe in water and be unclean until evening." Look, I had to caution myself here, and I want to call out my colleagues who work in the healthcare space. Whoever touches his bed shall wash his clothes and bathe in water and be unclean until evening. How often do we get back home and walk right into the kitchen, open the fridge, get on our beds, lying down, contacting our family members with the same clothes with which we have walked all day? And whoever sits on anything on which the man with the discharge has been sitting shall wash his clothes and bathe in water and be unclean until evening. Also, whoever touches the man with the discharge shall wash his clothes and bathe in water and be unclean until evening. And so on and so forth. It says, any saddle on which the man with the discharge rides becomes unclean. Whoever touches anything that has been under him shall be unclean until evening. And this just goes on. It says, an earthenware container that the one with the discharge touches shall be broken, and every wooden container shall be rinsed in water. Even when the man with the discharge becomes cleansed from his discharge, he shall count off 7 days for his purification. He shall then wash his clothes and bathe his body in running water, and will become clean. This is very instructive, and you will find it in Leviticus chapter 15. And I do not see how this could have been in place thousands of years ago, and today in the 21st century, most of us definitely fall short of the standard. That's why we are here. That's why we are here to help each other, remind each other of the standards that we all need to hold ourselves accountable for public good, for your good, as well as my good. So today, I want to draw our attention to one of the ways that we can break this chain of infection. If we cannot stop bacteria from developing resistance, we can at least break the chain of resistant bacteria getting into our bodies and then causing infection. So I want to talk about one of the most proven ways, which is hand wash. You will not believe, and I'm not ashamed to say so, that until I think about 3 years ago, when an infectious disease expert taught us how to properly wash our hands, I was under the illusion that I knew how to wash my hands. So we need to learn how to wash our hands properly. To wash your hands properly, you need to have running water. You saw in the book of Leviticus just now, at the time when there was no plumbing yet, that the Bible says the person who is now clean should wash himself under running water. So if there is no tap, we need to find a way to ensure that the water that we are washing with is running, so that whatever we are washing runs off. So you must wet your hands first, then apply soap, and then ensure that you rub your hands together for long enough for the soap to lather. In washing your hands, you need to be sure to wash in between your fingers, paying particular attention to that small cup-like space at the middle of the palm of your hand. Remember to wash the back of your hands, and remember also to wash the spaces under your nails on both sides. There are certain things we must keep in mind that must warrant our washing our hands. We must wash our hands under these circumstances. When you come in contact with food, before you eat, especially if you're going to be eating finger foods, that is, those are foods that you take with your fingers. And after you finish cooking, if you handle market produce, meat, vegetables, and so on, washing your hands is a must. Yes, we may not have been doing it before, but again, that's why we are having this time together, so that we can improve on what we had been doing before and start doing those things that are good that we had not been doing before. If you have any contact with animals, whether to caress them, to care for them, or to clean their cages or feed them, then you must wash your hands afterwards. If you are providing care for babies, for adults, any kind of care provision, whether you are changing diapers or you are assisting the person, like an older person, to transfer from bed to chair or chair to bed, whether you are helping with feeding, whatever kind of care you are providing, you must wash your hands before and after. If you find that you are exposed to body fluids, whether from sneezing, coughing, or stools or urine, then those hands must be washed with soap and running water. There are other situations where you must wash your hands. For example, you are in a workspace and you know that the computer you are using, even if it's just you using that computer, you need to wash your hands, because you use the computer, you touch the doorknob, you touch many people, you shake hands and so on. Not to talk of when you are sharing computers, you are sharing other things in the workspace, you need to wash your hands. If for some reason you are not able to get running water and soap to wash your hands, then at the very minimum, you could use alcohol-based sanitizer. Alcohol-based, where the alcohol content is actually 60%. However, if your hands are visibly stained, then the only thing to do, please, is to find water and to wash your hands. The key message here is this: we are living in a world where we are gradually losing the fight with bacteria. Bacteria seem to be winning the fight. They seem to be getting very savvy in developing resistance. And we humans are not helping matters. Our behaviors are educating the bacteria about ways to overcome antibiotics by the day. Our overuse, our misuse of antibiotics, our refusal to pay attention to proper personal and workplace hygiene, infection prevention and control practices are driving antibiotic resistance. I'm hoping that everyone listening to this podcast will think about how we can re-engineer our workspace practices, especially those of us in the healthcare space, and our home practices to limit the transmission of potentially harmful bacteria. We do not want anyone we know or love get infected with a resistant strain of bacteria. And I hope that it doesn't happen to you or anyone you know.
Please subscribe to our YouTube channel. It's free. We'd also like you to stay updated on our content by hitting the notification button, and do please share with your loved ones. For more exclusive content, you could visit our website at aituaje.com, aituaje.com. We could also connect on Facebook, Instagram, Spotify, Apple Music, and Amazon. I look forward to seeing you next time. Bye.
Live happy and healthy, my brother. Live happy and healthy, my sister.